Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. Today, we're incredibly fortunate to be joined by the fantastic Jenna Coleman, who's currently starring in the Netflix series, The Serpent. And the first thing I wanted to dive into was a lot of your research, because in playing Marie, you had access to a lot of her writing and her diaries. And so how did that really help you in preparing this character and really understanding the internal subtext of who she was beyond the scripts?
I think it was a really rare script because it came to me with like 6 episodes back to back with research material, statement, also her photographs and her, her visual journey, like seeing those images that are so filmic before you start and then diving into a script with that world already there in your head was really amazing. And then I had amazing voice recordings of her, which were really useful because they were of her when she was in prison. So it was kind of post Charles and post the court case. So hearing what she was like then and how she communicated, how she spoke, and then reading her diaries, which were her inner, obviously her inner world when she was living with Charles Sobhraj and going through that period of time when they were, drugging people and can at house parties, and her inner life and her kind of obsession with him and her torture and her turmoil. And the way that she writes is it's kind of like very romantic, and it's like really dark and tortured, and it kind of undulates. So to see that inner world versus the outer world instantly was such an amazing way to be gifted a script.
And with that inner world, there's so few moments within the series where she's actually able to say what she's really thinking and what she's feeling internally, because she's constantly having to project an image of herself, whether it's to Charles or whether it's because there's outside people that they're trying to bring into their circle. And so within that, how did that alter the way that you were working with a lot of the text, knowing that that was a surface level presentation, but that wasn't really what was going on beneath her most of the time?
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It was so complicated because she was living almost on so many spheres all the time. She had her conscious world, which was the world that she constructed, almost the world in which she wished to live in and wanted to live in, and was the only way that made it possible, I guess, to live this life with Charles, which was delusion. So the kind of the conscious is all about the delusion, like looking at the magazines, the way that she dresses. I always had this again, it's like she's living a film version of her own life, and it's like she's always hiding. Yet on the subconscious, it's the truth, and it's about kind of suppressing that. But those two forces, her conscious and her subconscious, are kind of always fighting each other. So to each scene was it felt so interesting, and there was so much depth, because it's like, where on this spectrum is she sitting right now? Like how much of the kind of the reality versus her delusion is coming through, like where, because they're always constantly fighting. So that duality was it was rich. It's great.
I was also so surprised by how quickly it was after she went back to be with him that she actually started to become complicit in everything that she was doing. And it was really the span of about 3 weeks. And so I wanted to ask you about performance-wise, how you worked to really build that arc, which is such a huge character arc, but at the same time is really taking space in the span of only about 3 weeks, which is quite challenging.
Yeah, but that's what's so fascinating. And that's, again, it was kind of one of the keys in a way. I get asked so often, is she a victim? Is she not a victim? Is she? And what's so interesting to me is in real life, in her diaries, from meeting Charles Sobhraj, it was only 3 weeks before she started drugging people and being complicit in that aspect of Charles's victims. And this is a woman who, she'd never traveled before. She'd never left Canada before. I think she was a middle child. She was a receptionist she'd kind of lived this life that was very grey. She describes like banal, grey, bland, everyday sameness. And it's that woman who hasn't really had a lot of life experience, that within 3 weeks she's drugging people. And I in her diaries and in different people's people have written about the first time Marie-Andrée met Charles Sobhraj. And what's very interesting is it was like she was active. She wasn't, you know, someone who was just whisked along for the ride. She was also active. She liked him, and she wanted to be with him, and she wanted to be noticed, and she wanted to be kissed by him, and she pursued him too. So it wasn't just a woman who was dragged along this journey. It was also a woman who was diving into the flames of it.
And with that way that you were just describing, how part of it was that she wanted to be noticed, I feel like you really capture that essence of he's the first person to really ever look at her and see the complete version of who she is. And even that scene where the two of you are on the beach and he puts sun lotion on the scar on your leg, and it's like that's the first time that anyone has probably ever touched her there. And so I was interested in the way that the two of you really constructed that feeling of just those early moments and what he was giving her and the way that he was looking at her in this new way that she'd never experienced in her life before.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of the psychological warfare there is so interesting, and obviously it's how Charles Sobhraj drew people in, because there was a lot of, you know, he built her up, and again you can see his letters in terms of, you know, come when she went back to Canada and he was like, come, I want to marry you, I want to have your children, and it was these really intense romantic letters. And I think that kind of the dark poet and the romantic bent of Marie-Andrée, the girl who was reading like Madame Bovary and these kind of books, that's what hooked her in. And then when she arrived, what's very interesting and what we see in episode 2 is they shared a bed, but he wouldn't touch her. And so she'd kind of built up this whole romantic image of the man that I'm going to marry, and then he wouldn't touch her. So it was like hot, cold, hot, cold. And I think it was part of a character breakdown. It was a part of his way of accessing, you know, of how to break her down so that he could then control and build, you know, you're going to be beautiful, you're going to be Monique. And I think she was just so wanted to live this. She didn't want to be herself, which I think is so interesting. It's like her self-worth was so low that she wanted to be whoever he wanted her to be, because she was obsessed by him and full of self-hatred, I think.
And I've heard you describe her obsession with him as almost being like an aspect of religion to her, with like how it was like consuming her all day and all night, and she did actually grow up religious as well. So when you were constructing that obsession that she had with him and the way that she really looked at him almost as this deity within her own life, did you look at the parallels specifically within the religious upbringing and how that would have transferred over into her feelings for him?
Yeah, but it's really funny. It's not something I went into conscious of or immediately picked up from the script. And I can't remember where I was in the shooting. And it was like a key lock, like something totally clicked. And I was like, that's it. Like, that's the key, because really trying to break down and understand how this woman, you know, she wasn't naive either. Like, she was in certain aspects of life, but she was also knowing and wise in certain ways and complicit. And I was like, trying to find the key thing within her. And I think that for me was a real kind of light bulb moment of, she's grown up incredibly, incredibly religious. And by transferring this on to Charles, her obsession with him, and also for her, it gave her, you know, if I love him, love is good, love is God, therefore my love for him is pure. And purity then allowed her moral compass able to carry on, you know, alongside him and carrying on with these crimes. So for me, that was it. And it's so interesting because at the end of her life, and when she's in prison, she finds God again. And it's like she needs this kind of this anchor. And I think that's what happened with Charles. It's the way that she writes about him is almost like he is something kind of holy, but it's also the way that she kind of compasses almost her way around him, like he is this godlike figure to her. So yeah, that for me, I think was a real key moment in terms of how she operates.
And her moral compass and that complicity is such a journey. And there's such a huge shift in that moment where you're standing outside of the room and hearing everything that's going on, holding the music up to your ear. And that's the moment where it's like, she no longer can deny what's happening, even to herself in that moment. And so I was really interested in the construction of that scene and how you really found such a shift and a change to be able to bring that into your performance in that particular moment.
Yeah, I mean, that was day one. That was like literally landing in Bangkok like the day before her costumes. And I just remember it's so that funny thing where you're first on set and you first put on the costumes and you're like trying to find like the physicality and the but that from first reading the script, that scene again was a key moment, because hearing what's going on in the room next door, like being aware of what's going on around you and how to exist not in that reality in that moment. And it's almost, by drowning out the noise, listening to music, therefore I'm vacating this situation. It's like mentally she decides when to vacate almost. And I do find, again, in her romantic storybook version, her filmic life, this exotic, adventurous life that she was living with Charles Sobhraj, that is it was almost as if she was playing her own music the whole time. It was like delusion to that kind of extent.
And as much as you had to craft that journey of reaching that point, and then when she becomes fully complicit in everything, you also had to then construct her coming out on the other side of it and pulling away from him, and a lot of those gradual realizations of the lies that she'd been telling herself for so long. So how did you navigate the way that you wanted her as a character to start extrapolating herself from his hold?
Yeah, that story point in particular was so interesting because it went through many script changes. So because of the pandemic and because of our shutdown, like episodes 6 and 7 in particular. So we first began with this journey of her becoming the perfect wife and living in Paris and on her kind of her own leading her own narrative again of, she's going to become a mother and they're going to live this pure life now. And then as what happened was as the pandemic hit and we went back into the edit, obviously the writers, the director, producers, we went through a lot of script changes for locations and all sorts of things. But it was such an unusual way to approach a series to park it midway. And what it meant was everything got recalibrated. So that kind of breakdown of her no longer being able to live in her own reality had quite a different arc. So it was almost like this gradual realization that this mad adventure is kind of coming to an end, and it's seeing their faces in the magazines, in the newspapers all over the world. And that is kind of like that is completely the cracked moment. And from that moment of it's in writing, her picture is on the front of every newspaper, that is the beginning of the unraveling in a way. And that was so fun to play because it was almost like, the woman who becomes totally undone, and what we, doing the costumes, and who can she can't listen to the radio anymore and drown out in the music. She has to just exist in reality. And for someone who's lived in delusion, it's like a real unraveling.
And one of the questions I had about the delusion is there's so many mentions and so many moments for her where she really wants to be his wife and she wants to have a family and she wants to have kids with him. And I was interested in whether you constructed that side and that desire of her as something where she actually genuinely believed that could happen with this man, or if that was part of the delusion and the lie that she was telling herself mentally.
Yeah, again, it's very interesting because we had the real life Nadine who came to set. And again, this is documented in some of the books. So the real life Nadine, I asked her, I was like, do you think they were really in love? I think she was very freaked out to see me and Tahar dressed like the life that she had lived by the pool with the dog. And I was like, do you think they really loved each other? And she said, yes. Then he was unfaithful, Marie-Andrée more, obviously more. But she said, she asked her one day, would you want to have children with this man? And apparently she replied, I could never, they would be a monster. So again, that isn't someone who is that, again, and choosing which reality to exist in, choosing when to be deluded, choosing when to shut your eyes, choosing when to drown out the noise, and also knowing, like always knowing it's there underneath. It's such a, so she did, I think for me, I was playing that as delusion, almost wish it hard enough and it will come true, even though the guts and the instincts and all of the subconscious is almost screaming the whole way of the truth of what is happening.
And character-wise for her, so much of who she is and who she projects herself to be is frequently based off who he is telling other people that she is. It's like, oh, she's pregnant, we're having kids. Oh, she's a model, you know, she's very famous in Europe. And then she immediately has to switch it on and become that person. So was that a really different experience for you in terms of scene work, in terms of not just looking at what your character was saying, but always really having to look at the few lines before that Tahar was telling other characters about you?
Yeah, I think it was somebody who was so, again, it's like the lack of self-worth, the lack of not knowing of self, the drowning woman, the kind of the hidden woman, and the woman, like, it's like, you know, she like rotated around him all the time anyway. Like if he was anywhere in the room, I think, and that was in the playing of it, wherever Tahar was, I was kind of always like orbiting like around him, reacting of what he needed, what he wanted at that time. And it's I mean, it's so sad. It's so sad that that's how she totally operated. And that was, every scene was kind of, in a way, it was almost be like, let's see what Charles decides to do, and then I'll decide what I'll do. She would never lead, ever. And until and which was what's so satisfying about that, kind of the more Lady Macbeth unraveling at the end, where she's been dragged through so much, and there's the big argument scene in episode 8 where she finally confronts him, and it's kind of like she's got nothing left to hide behind, and it's quite ugly. And it's this that was the thing where she really attacked him and kind of met him on his level, which I really enjoyed playing, and a little bit at the end as well.
I find that sense of her orbiting him so fascinating. And off the back of that, wanted to ask you about working with Tom Shanklin, who was the main director on the series, because he very much directed all of you in a sense where it wasn't, okay, this is the mark, this is where you need to hit, but allowed a lot of fluidity of motion. So how did that really change a lot of the ways that you would approach blocking and physical movement within the scenes? And particularly to your point of being able to really revolve her around Charles in the scenes from a physical sense as well.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I loved it so much. It was so liberating. And I can't imagine doing it any other way. Like particularly all the Cannock House scenes. I mean, I don't know, to get that kind of that 1970s lived in, like dirty, grimy Bangkok vibe, the liberation of that period. And what I loved about Tom so much, I mean, it was almost like continuity does not matter, and every actor in the scene, everyone was free to do whatever and try things or throw it out. And it was just, the environment was incredible, because it would also meant, you know, we'd do a scene a whole certain way, and then suddenly, you know, we had this thing where Tahar would always ask Tom, Libra, let's do one for free, a scene for free. And it's like, I loved that, because it was like, what's he going to do now? What's Tahar going to do? What's Tahar the actor going to throw at me? And so it was always this feeling of like excitement, because I knew something was about to happen, because Tahar, you know, he's kind of he's a really unpredictable actor in a great way, like a scene partner way, and a very dynamic actor. But also in terms of playing Charles Sobhraj and what that does to Marie-Andrée, to be surprised in that moment, or suddenly he'd take my breath away by being really kind, when we'd actually played the rest of the scenes where he was ignoring her, and then suddenly he'd do something like touch my face and be really kind. And then as Marie-Andrée, that's completely like debilitating and unexpected, and then you don't know where you sit or stand or feel within the scene, and it's kind of confusing. And so the relationship was great, really great to explore for that. And Tom just completely enabled every actor in the scene to feel totally free and was interested in what every actor wanted to bring. I mean, even the monkey. Like the monkey had so many takes and did all these versions, and the dog, and there was a big competition between Fufu the dog and the monkey. They couldn't be in the same take together. I mean, it was just like everything that you would hope making something from the 1970s set in Bangkok, like everything that you would hope that would be. It was like that.
And with the time setting, that also lends itself to the pacing, and you know, there's no kind of like constant fast cuts and edits between different coverage when you're watching the series. It really lets everything live and breathe organically. And did that transcend to the way that you were filming a lot of these scenes as well, in terms of just like that slightly slower sense of pacing?
Yeah, everything just felt, I mean, you never particularly, they did a really interesting specific kind of like, we did a lot of like 70s zooms, and so you never like the camera, you never knew where it was, what it was doing. You never knew if it was coming in close, zooming away, swinging around, like, yeah, that sense of yeah, absolutely, it just gave us a real sense of freedom and spontaneity.
And you were mentioning her costumes earlier, and I know that you've talked extensively about how useful those details were in building her as a character, and even down to like the way that she carries herself differently. And so I wanted to ask you about the collaboration and coming up with a lot of elements of her look, particularly because, like so many of her other character details, again, it's sometimes the costumes are telling us who she is, and sometimes they're telling us who Charles wants her to be at the same time again.
Yeah, the character costume journey was so fun, and Tom again was amazing at especially because we shot so out of sequence at the beginning, and I mean, obviously the timelines are like back forth, and so really pinpointing and plotting like how she goes from Marie-Andrée to Monique, and in a very like through a very specific timeline, especially when you're seeing it on screen in a non-linear way. So it was really carefully kind of locked down, and we used a lot of real life images as well. And I mean, we had Marie-Andrée, we used a lot of, I mean, we had this really funny, like big rock, like geeky kind of rocket t-shirt. And I was part wigged as well, because we wanted her to have like quite undone fuzzy hair, because it was like a texture thing. And then we had the idea that she was, okay, so she's like it's like a dark Bridget Bardot vibe. And a lot of the initial scripts was she was always on the balcony, and she was always like behind the big shades, like with a cigarette, like looking at everybody, and you couldn't get close to her. And it was like, she was quite enigmatic and mysterious, because we almost wanted her to look like the people that she reads in the magazines, but not be able to really quite reach her at first, and leave her more mysterious. And then you follow through and you see the journey. And we went to more like Bianca Jagger kind of images. When she gets to Paris, she's kind of trying to live that film style life, but also more tailored and put together and a bit more respected. And then again, bringing her right back down at the end, and for the undoing.
And because you just mentioned how many moments there are with her reading magazines, that's such a constant for her throughout the series. So what was that moment of that choice that was going to be something that she was going to be doing so frequently as one of her forms of escapism?
I think it was in the script, was where it began. Like, it was in the script, and I think again that was something that Tom was always saying. It was almost like her, it's how she pictured, it's how she created this person. It was like, you know, Charles is always pushing on her, kind of, you know, you are Monique, and she used that name as well to the end of her life while she's in prison, which I found very interesting. Like, she kept the name Monique that he gave her. So it was almost like, again, like this fake reality that she's set. So it's like, you know, stepping into her own film version. Let's step her into those magazines. Psychologically, it was a really fascinating journey, but also really, really fun to do, kind of to pinpoint it in that way.
I also wanted to talk about your work with Tahar in the series, because obviously you know, the majority of time that we see you on screen is always with him, and there's always like a two-hander element even when it's an ensemble scene with other characters. And did you find that when you started out that you came with very similar stylistic approaches down to details about the types of conversations or how much you like to even talk about a scene before shooting, or was it something where you came in with slightly different approaches and found like a real cohesive way that like married both of your styles?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I was really nervous to begin with, because I mean, one, you generally are when you start a new job anyway. But I mean, I was a really big fan of Tahar's from A Prophet that I saw at the London Film Festival, like when it first came out. And I just remember going to see that film, and I love that film. And I was like, as soon as I saw Tahar's name attached to this project, I was like, I have to work with this actor. So, you know, there was definitely a certain element of that. And then there was an element of, you know, how is this going to work between us cohesively, between English and French and English, back forth, and as a technical aspect. But what was so interesting was, I don't know when it happened. It was, you know, there was that element of us trying to find, you know, in the first week, and you're finding your feet of like pitching, where are they in this relationship? But actually, in terms of actors and how we met, it was just so easy. And I think we work in very similar ways, and there was just not the need to really speak about, I don't know, I just kind of, or I'd understand what he was doing, and vice versa. And we gave each other space. And I mean, he's such a gentle and such a respectful actor. So you feel completely safe. And as long as you feel safe, then it opens you up to trying everything. So that was a really amazing part of the relationship. But also, yeah, we'd have a take, and then Tahar would go, let's do another. And it was almost like an unspoken, and a very easy unspoken relationship that left us free to really, really explore the characters together. It was, he's great. He's very great.
With the language between the two of you, it really captures that authentic sense of fluidity of bilingualism, where it's like they don't even always notice when they're jumping back and forth between languages with each other. But at the same time, there are moments where they're very specifically switching languages because of people around them. And was that something where the language that they were speaking in, even if it's changing within a conversation, was always delineated in the scripts for the beginning, or did that evolve a little bit as you all felt out what those scenes were?
Yeah, it evolved. I mean, it was incredibly, Richard wrote it incredibly specifically in terms of, you know, like we looked at the opportunities of where we could use language again as psychological warfare. So, you know, like, you know, they flicked French to speak privately, but also her English was not as strong as his, and he would be like, you need to speak English, so speak English now, or suddenly changing it's like almost changing, using it in an argument or using it as a tactic. So sometimes he would change into English, and then she'd stay in French, and then he'd come back to her in English, and it would be this quite interesting tension between them. So there was an absolute, from Richard Wallow, like an absolute attempt to look at that in terms of the dynamics of their relationship. And then as you know, as time went on as well, there's certain specifics of, like, you know, episode 7 is set all in Paris, but, you know, producers didn't want the entire episode to be in French. So, like, looking at certain scenes, or which scenes emotionally kind of lent itself, and sometimes that would change. So yeah, it was kind of an evolving, ongoing process.
And from your performance throughout the series and the journey of inhabiting her, is there an aspect of playing her throughout the show that you're proudest of in terms of your own sense of accomplishment with it?
Oh, honestly, just finishing it, like, literally feels such, because I really can't explain the amount of things that the amount of things that went wrong on that shoot, the amount of things that happened that really united the whole team together as this kind of like labor of love, of like how passionate we were about getting the story out, about telling the story. So just completing it, like, I kind of still can't quite believe it's come out. It was a 13-month journey in the end, from what was beginning like a 4-month. But Tom Shanklin said something, it was like building the Sistine Chapel. It was like, it took, I think for him as well, this journey's been so long from when he first kind of read about Charles Sobhraj and was looking at making it into a series. So yeah, getting to damn finish line feels great.
Well, I'm so glad that despite an international schedule and a global pandemic that you managed to complete it, and congratulations.
I know. I mean, yeah, there was this one point I remember when Tahar went off to shoot the Mauritanian, and we got back to set and he just looked at me and we were like fully in our costumes and we were like, nothing can go wrong again now. And then it was like, and then like the world shut down and we're on the flight straight home. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things. I feel, you know, telling a true life story is there's something really satisfying about that. And yeah, just the people, the cast, the crew was beautiful.
You've done such a fantastic job with your performance in the show, and thank you so much for talking with us all about it.
Thank you.